let's get the show started. So welcome back, everyone, to Behind the Shield. My name is Marco Estrella. I'm going to be your host today. On today's show, we have our panel of experts that will be discussing or dissecting and discussing hot topics from the past few weeks. We have a guest from Ping Identity with us today who's going to talk to us about trust in an untrustworthy world. And as always, we'll have the audience participation questions towards the end of the show. If you're new to Behind the Shield, welcome. This is a safe space. No sales pitches, just honest discussion about cybersecurity issues that concern us all, that we work with every day. So in the next 60 minutes, what we hope to do with this show is to inform you and entertain you a little bit, so that you become a regular listener and come back every month. If you like what you hear and you would like to listen to previous episodes, you can do so on the show's webpage, which is virtualguardian.com/event. And if you're like me and you like to listen to podcasts on the go, I love to listen to podcasts when I'm driving. I'm always listening to podcasts in the car. You can do so. You can find Behind the Shield on your favorite podcast service. The show's agenda is very simple. We start with a 30-minute current event discussion, which will be followed by a 15-minute spotlight talk. And then we close out the show with audience questions. If you're listening to the episode live, feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom interface. So let's get to it. To help me navigate the hot topics segment, I call upon my trusted cybersecurity expert panel. And today the panel is composed of Patrick Naum, Virtual Guardian's CEO. So Patrick helps customers with solutions on how to defend themselves against all manner of cyber threats. For the first time on the BTS panel of experts, I'm happy to present Steve Manuel, Solstice's Chief Enablement Officer. And that's a different type of CEO, Steve. What is a Chief Enablement Officer? Can you tell me that in a couple seconds?
Yeah, thank you, Marco. Great to be here. First time on the panel and loving the conversations. So really, I do get that question a lot. And it's really, when I think about enablement, I think about execution and enabling my teams. We deliver by the we and not necessarily by the me. And I really believe in empowering teams. So I do carry that title, and it does get the same kind of question you just asked. So it's a good place to be in.
Good. And this is your first time on the panel, so you get the added bonus of giving us the Solstice 60-second elevator pitch, please.
Absolutely. So Solstice is a ESI affiliate. We've been joined the ESI group of companies. It'll be almost 2 years ago, and I'm going to talk about our services and practices really from a security perspective, given the audience today and the interest in the conversation we have today. So I'll start off by talking about digital identity. We started that business in early 2007, and we started really in the IGA, or identity governance and administration. So these are workforce-facing users, and you're dealing with attestation, segregation of duties, roles, centralizing identity stores, and dealing with some small and larger entities, sort of 30 to 50,000 users. And I would say over the last 5 years, we've been more focused on identity and access management, and that's really for B2C and B2B type customers. So these are millions of identities. We've worked a lot with the financial sector and a lot in the telco sector. So, and that's getting into some of the topic areas today, like MFA, multi-factor authentication. And passwordless is becoming a very big conversation with some of the standards like FIDO. And probably the most other interesting practices around enterprise API. And that's really the conversation around application modernization, cloud and API, lifecycle management. It's really been a natural extension for our customers to think about, okay, I've secured the users, and now I want to secure the services, and I want to do that in a frictionless way. As you know, the more secure you make something, it tends to be, usability tends to be a problem. So we've worked a lot with our customers about building a lot of mobile experience, tablets, cell phones, for enterprise services. And then that probably the third most important piece is digital intelligence. And that started off for us around the whole sort of big data analytics. And over the last year, that's evolved into really two areas. Observability, which is becoming very, very important for customers that are migrating monolithic applications, breaking them into microservices, moving them into public cloud in some sort of a hybrid environment. And the other side is a space you're very familiar with, which is cybersecurity, SIEM, or security incident and event management. So we've been doing some work in the financial sector. Cloud is pretty much every one of our customers are on some sort of a journey to the cloud. So we're working with them. And the last and probably most interesting service for us is really around agile services. So a lot of our customers are very interested in us, not necessarily what we're providing as a solution, but how we do it. So we're very agile centric, very much product thinking. We put complete product teams into our customers.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve. Welcome to the panel. And finally, last but not least, our spotlight guest, Dr. Branden Williams, Vice President of IAM Strategy at Ping Identity. He has agreed to join our panel, so welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. What type of doctorate do you have, Branden? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm very much like a hands-on technologist. So all of my, I'm a very technical person, and all of my sort of work in the space has been self-taught and trained on the job. My degrees are in business. So I have a doctorate of business administration, and it's a concentration in business intelligence, which is, data analytics and the fields that go sort of spring up around it. And I've had it for 8 years now. The field is so much different from when I started. So it's always, anytime you're doing academics, it's always constant learning and constant application.
Absolutely. What's your alma mater?
I went to Capella University for my doctorate. I'm in the University of Texas system for my undergrad, and then University of Dallas for my MBA.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome, gentlemen, to the panel. So let's get started with the hot topics today. Patrick, you're first up on my list. And, when I read your topic, when you submitted your topic to me this past week, I was a bit bummed because you're going to talk badly about MFA, which I love. So give our audience the details. What did you work on for us?
What do you mean talk badly about MFA? It's not 99% of issues.
Yeah, for me. It's the simplest, most easy way, what everybody needs. So I don't like hearing it has potentially some workarounds or flaws. So anyway,
thanks, Marco. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, MFA is like table stakes, right? If you're running a business today, it protects you against all your credentials being compromised. It addresses 99% of account takeover attacks. However, like everything, it has blind spots, certain blind spots. And to me, what attracted my attention is based on the fact that a false sense of security is your worst case scenario in security, right? When you think something is being taken care of and it's not. And I came across an article from Hacker News, and basically what it's just identifying is the fact that there's a few blind spots around MFA solutions, and they concern PowerShell or remote execution or remote desktop. Not the remote desktop protocols that the MFA interacts with that. Everything that has to do with executing commands remotely. It's one of the weaknesses because the protocols, I don't want to go into too much details, but the protocols were developed prior to MFA technologies back in the day. So essentially what this creates is a situation where if you're exposing certain services to command prompt administration, they could be subject to credential, if their credentials are compromised, you could penetrate servers and workstations that way and then move laterally within your environment, therefore bypassing the MFA authentication. So it creates all sorts of situations in terms of blind spots. We know that 61% of issues in terms of account takeovers are related to credential theft. So it's a lot of it covers a lot of use cases that could be problematic. The other thing as well is that, and this is not necessarily good policy, a lot of administrators use the same system or service passwords on-prem and for SaaS and cloud applications. So you can imagine if you have someone coming in, compromising remote command shells, executing commands, and could also take control of the cloud environment at the same time for organizations that are structured that way with the same credentials. So it's created a whole area, a whole blind spot, but also it also highlights the fact that you need to design your network architectures in a way to prevent that. So essentially, zero trust frameworks are critical to prevent lateral movement, leveraging microsegmentations and network isolation and those types of solutions. But also, there's a new area that's being developed is unified identity protection. So to place a piece of software that handles the authentication between the old protocols and MFAs and has this additional validation. Therefore, I would say replicating functionally what an MFA platform will give you, and it actually sits in the middle between MFA and your protocols. So there are solutions towards that. I just wanted to highlight the fact that if you're deploying MFA out there, it's not going to solve all your issues. There's a few blind spots we need to be aware of, especially in the context of remote control or remote commands for sysadmins running their environment remotely.
Okay, so you mentioned kind of a solution is to zero trust. You mentioned it as a solution, but is that the only thing aside that CISOs can do to fix this problem?
Well, even before that, you need to deploy a proper PAM to map out your privileged access, right? Who has access to what? What are those accounts? Number one. So an inventory and management. But like I mentioned earlier, unified identity protection that sits in the middle, making sure you have proper microsegmentation and all your other mechanisms to prevent lateral movement, or at least identify a lateral movement. So those are all things you could put in place to mitigate this issue.
Okay. All right.
Awareness is key here.
Branden, Steve, anything that you'd like to add on that, or?
I mean, the only thing I'll add is that it's also about using risk and context, right? So, MFA was sort of somebody presented this to me yesterday, and I really have been thinking about it quite a bit since then. He said, MFA was really designed initially to kind of be like a passwordless solution, right? It was kind of designed to remove the password from the critical part of that authentication by creating something else that we could rely on. It was out of band. But there's, it maybe even sort of ruined our pathway to passwordless and elongated our pathway to passwordless to get there because we've been relying on this other tech. There's both high and low tech ways to abuse it.
Absolutely.
It can be seen as a crutch in some cases.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're reliant on it. Yeah. Okay.
Good
All right.
point.
Thanks. Let's move on. Second topic today. Steve, you're up next. You looked into T-Mobile's most recent security breach. I know that these guys have had several in the past years, but it seems to be an indicator of enterprises grappling with API attack vector. So APIs as an attack vector. So can you fill us in with the details, please?
Security and observability are crucial for the success of your company. But do you have all the information you need to protect your organization from potential threats? Introducing our latest ebook from Solstice, Convergence of Observability and Security, the benefits and approaches to better and safer applications and services. With this comprehensive guide, you'll gain valuable insights into the latest security and observability practices, including how to detect and prevent attacks, gain in-depth visibility, and secure your data. Don't leave your company's security to chance. Download our ebook today and gain the knowledge you need to stay ahead of the game. Visit our website now at solstice.ca.
Sure. So it's a great conversation because we're, with some of our telco customers, we're having these exact same conversations. A couple of things I noticed about this issue, as you pointed out, there's been multiple breaches there dating all the way back to 2021 with 48 million account numbers, service plan details leaked out. They had a breach in 2020 and one in 2019. So my observations here, obviously without knowing the root cause, and they won't necessarily tell you what exactly, they just said it was a bad actor, but we don't know if that bad actor was inside, outside. But the first thing that I noticed was they didn't detect the problem until January 5th of this year, yet it happened in November of last year. So, obviously operational visibility is potentially a concern here. So why didn't they see it? Do they not know who are the consumers of their APIs? Do they not have the correct security policies around APIs? When you think of things like DevSecOps, where security is becoming tightly integrated within a DevOps process, are they actually creating, automated testing to test for things like this? So what we see is, do you know who's consuming your APIs? And then when you have sort of east-west traffic, where you have APIs calling other APIs in your network, it becomes a very complex environment when you're looking at a complete request reply. So, the other thing I thought about is I don't believe in the United States that there's a federal law like we have in Canada with PIPEDA, right? So if there was stronger regulation in place, would that in fact cause, this industry to behave more appropriately? Because in Canada, it's always a topic of conversation, user private, protecting customer confidentiality in its data is front and center. It also could be the fact that they didn't have the correct security policies defined. So, the most concerning thing is the reputation. The customers trust their identities. Some of that information, that privacy information gets leaked out. So there's a reputation hit for T-Mobile, and who knows what the long-term impacts of that will be. Given, I think today they're at, something like 135 million customers, right? So they're growing dramatically, like most of the telcos in the US are. So love to see more regulation, love to understand the application architecture. Were they deploying identity or some sort of API lifecycle management solution, like typically what you see with an API gateway, where you could govern the lifecycle of APIs in a centralized, regulated way, and take that away from the developers? We all know that developers write APIs all day long, and they're sort of just there, but not governed very well. So it would be interesting to understand what their application architecture really was there. So not a good. Let's just hope there's no more for T-Mobile at this point in time.
We at Virtual Garden, we do a lot of penetration testing on web applications, and APIs seem to be coming very, very into demand, and we see APIs everywhere now. Do you think that? Do you have any suggestions for our listeners who are worried about their own web applications and their APIs? Anything that maybe a quick tip that you can give them?
Well, the very first one is the one you just mentioned. Vulnerability and penetration testing. Figure out if you have a problem. Okay. And you could use something like the OWASP top 10 list, right? Which they release that every 3 or 4 years. It's a good place to start. We use it internally. I would also look at, do you have a proper API gateway solution in place to manage something on a large enterprise like this company? Do they have some way to govern their APIs? Okay. I would understand their data, their API security policies. What do they look like? Are they robust? Are they being integrated? I would then look at the DevSec model and understand is security and writing automated security tests. Is that part of development? We don't typically see security as a bit of an add-on at the end.
Exactly.
And then embrace security, right? Treat it foremost and upfront in your design. That would be just a few that I would recommend.
I don't want to put Branden on the spot there, but Branden, could you put your your end user experience or part of your career and shed some light on what the best practices in the enterprise?
Yeah, no, I was thinking about this as you were describing some of this stuff. And the biggest problem that we had at the last job was really discovery and knowing what was out there. And adding to it, when you start to look at cloud platforms like GCP or AWS, and you start putting your different APIs in those platforms, it becomes really, really challenging to understand, where everything is. We actually had an incident at my last company where, without getting into too much detail, there was an old API that didn't actually work for any sort of interaction, but it would absolutely let you do authentication testing. So somebody found that, realized it wasn't being protected by a credential stuffing service, and started pounding it with, a credential stuffing attack, right? So had we had better understanding and knowledge of the traffic that was touching that very edge, we could have seen that and stopped it. But I think that's where we start to run into problems. That everybody's using APIs. It's a great way to connect. It's a great way to sort of create a chain of value. But you do have to, you have to understand that you're playing with fire a little bit and really do the work behind it to make sure it's okay.
Okay, great. Good comment, guys. Thank you, Steve, for your topic. We're going to move on to topic 3, which is actually mine. So there's a story that's been going on for a couple of months. It started in the U.S. in December when the U.S. Senate passed a bill to ban TikTok. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. That move was picked up here in Canada, as it often happens. So our federal government picked it up, and then a few days later, some provincial governments, including the province of Quebec, where I am right now, and Patrick as well, banned the app on their employees' phones. So I have like a little bit of guilt with this story because I'm a user of TikTok, and
Shame
apparently I know that's it. Exactly. Everybody is like, we're kind of being shunned for using an app which is supposedly a tool of a foreign agent. Okay. And everybody knows that we're talking about China here to spy on citizens. And I'm contributing to that because I'm using it, and I share a couple of videos with my friends and family. So, and then I follow, so a lot of cybersecurity pundits here locally have been talking about it, and they've been critical of the government, saying, well, banning this is like putting a Band-Aid on a crack on a dam. It's like a slap on a wrist. It's not really going to do anything. It's kind of like a pathetic ban, to paraphrase. So banning the public public workforce from using it is not going to do much. So much more concerning are the younger people using the app and who are less self-conscious of cybersecurity. They just share without regards. They don't care about VPNs. They don't care about security measures. So that's where we should put our focus. This is what the cybersecurity pundits are saying. And then you have the other side of if I can give a little bit, the other side of the coin, people saying, well, when government starts banning things, never a good idea. You have to be careful. It's a slippery slope. And what about the First Amendment? Aren't we allowed to have free speech? And then you have those things. But let me just come back a little bit. Why is it considered a dangerous spying app? So there's an article with a researcher, or I should say, the research generated several articles where this gentleman found out that the JavaScript and the code behind the app has key logging capabilities. So basically, anything that you type and anything that you tap on your phone, have the phrase right here. Where's my phrase? I quote from the article: the TikTok iOS subscribes to every keystroke happening on a third-party website rendered inside the app. So essentially,
when we accept the terms and conditions blindly, we always do, we activate all that stuff.
Exactly. Nobody reads those things, even less the teenagers. And so what I wanted to know from you, because, I want to have some credibility in my job. I should
whatever's left of it.
I want to remove it. Thank you, Patrick. I opened the door on that one. So, but I can't kick the habit. I enjoy too much. I'll need a 12-step program probably to get off that app. But how do you see it? Should we ban it? Should we remove it? Is it a good first step?
It's a large-scale experiment in social engineering. things you're passionate about, Marco, the ability to talk nicely to people, show them the next shiny object and convince them to give you access to whatever you need. Well, we all failed that experiment because that's what it is. They created a shiny object that caters to our reptilian brain and gets us addicted in exchange of giving away control of all our data and lives. Listen, as long as us humans keep doing that and reacting that way, we're going to be in trouble. So a failed experiment, that's what it is, by a country that would not even allow that. Well, they don't want competition, so they do that themselves to their citizens, but they won't let a company do it on their own land. But yeah, send it over to where people do what they want.
Right, and we're acting like Facebook and whatever other apps, social apps out there. We act like they're not doing almost the exact same thing, right? But this one is a Chinese foreign thing, and when you think about it, they're concerned that it's a foreign nation controlling this media. But then again, we have an Australian person owning Fox News and Wall Street Journal. And we have a South African owning Twitter. Nothing is banned here. And we know that these media...
Elon is a South African now? Is that,
absolutely. He's a South African.
I know he's born there, but I mean... Branden, weigh in, man. I know you're itching to jump in.
No, I mean, I think Marco said it exactly right, which is, the campaign against TikTok was largely fueled by Facebook and others who are doing the exact same thing. Like if you're doing something inside the context of an app, like using a browser inside the context of that app, you're subject to whatever that app wants to do inside there, right? So that you can quickly see that, like, for example, if you're on Reddit and you click on a Reddit Facebook link for some reason, if it tries to render in the browser, you might have to log in. Otherwise, you go to the app and then you're outside of that context, right? So I think it's putting it in the right context and spin to understand where the actual risk is, but it's not like there aren't other companies doing it. I feel like if we're going to tackle that, we should sort of look here first to come up with some solid stuff to tackle it.
And that's how the hackers work, right? They embed themselves in an application and gain privileged access from that application. Yeah. It's the same model, but we're just authorizing it. And the hacker, we're upset about it.
Exactly.
I find it interesting in Canada that, the federal government response was around privacy, right? We have the Office of the Privacy Commissioner investigating. And I wonder if the generation that's using and consuming TikTok, do they really care that much about privacy? That's scary. Some people are using terms like, oh, this is a national security issue. And I go, really? Like sometimes perception is reality for people. And, but you're right. It seems like the other social media players out there are getting a pass on this. And for some reason, we focused on TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned, Steve, when you did your hot topic, like the need for a little bit more regulation. And that is exactly the way I feel. If it really, truly was about cybersecurity and privacy,
right,
wouldn't our North America, US, Canada be implementing some sort of GDPR here, a little bit more stringent cybersecurity control? So, and I just mentioned the word control. Is it more about control or the loss of control to be putting some sort of GDPR here? Less able to spy, less Patriot Act, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I don't know.
I just have to move the needle a little more, right? Not necessarily bring it at the end of the spectrum, but right now we're completely open in uncharted territory. We just have to tighten it a little bit. I don't say you can't tighten it too much, but a little bit more.
Okay. So I mentioned at the beginning of the show that when we were chit-chatting just right before we started, that I hadn't hit the bottom of the rabbit hole yet. And that's how I feel. I'm going to keep looking into that because I think this story is not going to go away. I think it's going to, especially that now it's going to be voted on by the House and eventually the president there in the US. So is it going to pass? Is it going to stay? What's going to happen? I'll let you know maybe at the next Behind the Shield.
So
Thank you very much.
I know now.
Yeah.
I know who to ask for about the latest TikTok hot topic.
There you go. Yeah. Call me. No problem.
Yeah.
It's not a disaster for your business when you're ready with a disaster recovery plan. In the event of a major disruption, minimize your downtime and impact on your bottom line through a quick recovery of systems. Let ESI's digital resilience experts help you with an IT continuity plan that supports your critical business functions. Unplanned outages happen. ESI will ensure your business is ready. Contact us at esitechnologies.com.
So we're going to move on to our spotlight talk, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your insight, guys. That was good. Nice hot topic segment. So let me pass over the mic to Branden. So for those who don't know, Dr. Branden Williams, I mentioned he was vice president of IAM strategy at Ping Identity. So Branden has over 25 years of experience in cybersecurity, technology, and business. His specialty is navigating complex landscapes, be it compliance, security, technology, or business, and finding innovative solutions to promote growth while reducing risk. Branden's talk today is titled Fostering Collaboration to Build Trust in an Untrustworthy World. So Branden, the next 15 minutes are yours. Take it away.
All right. Thank you, Marco. So for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to talk about trust, something that is inherently part of our lives. It's something that we value in the interactions that we have. And I want to attempt to use some really visually engaging words for those of you listening to the audio only portion of the podcast. So as businesses continue to do best in digital to drive outcomes, security professionals, CISOs, other people that are involved are increasingly playing a central role in building trust with users. And it's both internal and external to the firm. And they do it through innovative security strategies that enhance protection without sacrificing experience. But in a borderless world, borderless digital world with rapidly evolving threat landscape, as much as we talked about with the APIs, how can professionals overcome the organizational and resource challenges to secure that trust? CISOs need to find some common ground that fosters stakeholder collaboration. And in the case of building trust with users, it all starts with identity. So let's talk a little bit about how professionals can use identity to establish collaboration across the enterprise to develop and execute innovative security strategies that build trust with every user. So what are the main challenges that we now typically face when we're trying to incorporate trust-building activities as part of the strategies? One of them is that digital journeys are increasingly becoming more complex and elaborate. This has expanded the threat landscape, right? So it's led to more threat surface and more channels to secure. And this makes knowing who your users are and what resources they are accessing more important than ever. And all of that applies to both enterprises and workforces, employees and their end users, and interact with brands and their customers. So COVID kind of accelerated this paradigm shift, right? So it led to this explosion of people working from home. All of us were probably doing it. Some of us still are. Organizations were suddenly faced with new challenges related to monitoring and securing their remote workforces. Companies that already had a remote workforce generally had a good way to do this, but it became a scale problem, right? So instead of having, maybe 10% of my workforce at home, it was 100% or 90%. On the customer side, it really significantly accelerated. So, as a result, customers were forced to get uncomfortably comfortable with pushing more of their interactions to digital channels. And this was the case for both with companies with remote workforces, as well as the B2C on the CIAM side, the customer identity and access management side. And in fact, in order for many customers to just simply continue to thrive or even just survive, they had to come up with creative ways to re-engage with their customers in that digital manner, right? And do it safely. Now, for me, I generally prefer a digital first interaction, and that's kind of where I gravitate to. So I think that was a huge benefit to all of us who really do value a digital first or a strong digital interaction, because it made the sort of rules around the interaction shift into what I can control and how I want to approach that to the extent that I can with the technology that I operate, right? And it's also worth mentioning that for established companies, the biggest challenges often come with managing legacy systems and technologies. And I came from banking, so I was very familiar with the legacy interactions and legacy systems and technologies, and trying to overlay modern compute systems on top of them. That was quite the challenge. So all of this, ultimately created more opportunities for organizations to win or lose their end users' trust at every and any stage of that identity journey. So given that backdrop, what are the biggest opportunities to build this trust, right? So and for us as security professionals to influence how the organizations are going to work. And it really is through championing change that matters all the way through a firm's value stream. For example, by choosing to focus on the customer experience through a dynamic friction, meaning I want to introduce friction when you're doing things that are risky, or remove friction that's not needed when you're not. Making security invisible to end users is a key thing. And so like the change aspect is such a critical piece, but that dynamic friction is where I think on the security spectrum, it's where we all want to be from a security perspective. I want security to work, and I don't necessarily want my end user to notice it. To the extent that I can do that is where I win and make that experience better. That one exception is, for example, in banking, if you're going to all of a sudden add a new payee to your online bill pay, I probably want to do some risk calculations and maybe add a little bit of friction, not only to signal to you, an authorized user, that you're doing something that can affect your well-being, but also to an attacker to create a roadblock that they would have to jump through. So an example of how trust could be earned is by going passwordless. Now, passwordless is something we kind of hit on in the roundtable. It's a question I get a ton right now. And I think, it all stems from everybody's got a different definition of what passwordless actually means and what it means to them. And we also, by the way, whether you have legacy or not, we have systems that inherently require something like a password and will not function with the level of security that you want without it. So, as an example, if you're a big Mac shop, that FileVault has to have a password. There are some alternatives that are popping up, but, ultimately there still is a password that's there. And if you rely on Active Directory, Windows Hello is great, but if you rely on Active Directory, it still is a password there. Whether it's used or not, it's still there, right? So as we adopt these authentications for their employees, we find that companies who do this, they lower their security risks and enhance worker productivity. It also significantly improves customer experiences by making them more seamless and that online access more secure. So, and if you're looking for ways to explore this, figure out how do I help accelerate a passwordless journey in my own firm, something to really look at, as silly as it sounds, is how many help desk calls do you get around password resets or problems with authentication that deal with a password? And if the number is going to be greater than one, we're greater than zero, we know this. That was part of how we at Ping were sort of building business cases around how do we roll this out for us? We're an identity company, we should be leading the industry. So let's make sure we know how to do it. And it was quite a challenging journey, even for a company the size of us, right? But this is how you build trust. By consistently delivering those positive end user experiences with customers, you're earning that trust improves engagement, it lowers abandonment rates, and ultimately can drive higher revenue. So for employees, it's less time resetting passwords, entering passwords, dealing with all of the bad behaviors that we sort of created in the early 2000s with things like, well, you need to have at least an 8-character password, and random is good, and add all the symbols. And the joke that we usually tell is, everybody's password's all based on the same formula, right? Everyone starts with a capital letter, and it's usually some proper name or some theme in their life. Maybe it's a pet, maybe it's a child, maybe it's, just a favorite place that they have. They type that in there. And then because they need numbers in there, their complexity is going to be, 0323, because I just rotated my password in March of 2023. Then of course, everybody always adds the same special character at the end. It's an exclamation point, right? So those behaviors around forcing all that password changing, enforcing complexity, and just makes the whole system inherently more insecure because of the things that our lizard brains do to try to gain back or claw back some of that productivity that we lose by dealing with something like passwords, right? So you can nurture this, and you can do it by drilling down on just the login and authentication step of that identity journey. And there's even more opportunities to build trust. And it also sort of moves on to the next step, which is authorization, which is a big one as well. It's not just about authentication, but once you hit through, what are you actually authorized to do? And so this is my favorite couple of pages in the deck, right? So it's talking about orchestration. And orchestration is something you can use to accelerate building trust with users even more, right? It removes friction. It ties all these things together, and it can help you build trust by improving your user experience. So an example of that would be application integration. This is a pretty low-level example, but I think it's really important to sort of set a bar that we can all easily grasp, right? So companies now use an average of 976 applications, with only 20% of them being integrated into an overall authentication scenario, right? Why? Well, because of technology and resource limitations. It's easy just to throw usernames and passwords up there and tell people that they have to use it because everybody knows how to do that. There's a lot of hard-coded components as well. And sometimes when you have limited developer resources, you may not have the time or ability to integrate into centralized identity management systems. So they don't allow you to test those user experiences either. So this is something that I really gravitated towards when I think about how to build a good orchestration or build a good experience for a user. You have to be able to test it. You have to be able to use A/B testing to see how it works in the real world. Humans by themselves sometimes aren't the best at predicting, or we have a hard time predicting how humans will react. It's something that I'm fascinated in, and I use that. I do research a lot of that stuff when I'm building different types of things around security. But it's really helpful to observe them when they're doing the thing that you want them to do. What gets them engaged the best? I think actually e-commerce does a fantastic job of this, right? Because they want to remove any friction, right? Any step that is in between you joining the website and entering in your credit card. Once you enter in your credit card, then we'll start looking at fraud, or we'll start looking at other background stuff. But our goal in e-commerce is to get to that place where you enter a payment and I see that it's correct. I've done a basic authorization on that, right? So when I get to that spot, that's when I know that I'm in a position to create that interaction with the customer. But if I do something along the way, like for example, if I put in an address verification check, I may learn that I have higher abandonment and the fraud rates don't actually go up if a user doesn't do that step. So if I'm e-commerce, I don't want them to enter their address to secure the payment necessarily, or at least I don't want to take the address and run it against a fraud check, because sometimes people move and you might get a flag on the ABS check that comes back. I'll use other factors to determine if I think I'm going to lose money on this particular deal. So user experience testing is a huge benefit of this orchestration, because it does speed up development cycles, right? It speeds up your ability to optimize and iterate on your identity-related implementations and use cases, because instead of going from a complicated and technical requirement doc, which significantly slows down those cycles, you can bring both IT and the business together in a low-code, no-code orchestration platform, drag-and-drop interfaces, intuitive UI, to make it as smooth as possible. When I was at the bank, I would kill for this type of technology to give to our user experience people and say, look, you guys do it. I don't need to have development to redesign an interface on a login screen for you. You can do all of it there, and you have your login flows. Do you want to integrate another fraud provider? Do you want some more Signal? Do you want to include social logins? No problem. You drag, drop, integrate, boom. That's what I want you to do as a user experience person and a digital channel person at the bank. I don't necessarily want you writing BRDs and sending it down to the depths of the development organization, knowing that your BRD today results in a product in 18 months. So there's 3 ways to build trust through identity in our view of things. First is improving those digital transactions, right? So leveraging identity to rapidly evolve customer experiences to meet that increased digital demand and outpace your competition. The second one is tackle those legacy systems. Boy, I lived with that at the bank. You can't get away from it if you, it seems like day one of being in an IT organization is the best day. Day 2 is when you start to have legacy tech of some form or fashion that you have to work around as you're continuing to make improvements, right? So being able to tackle and overcome those limitations by having solid integrations with them. And then obviously the last piece is optimizing that user experience that we were talking about. It's leveraging orchestration to test and optimize end user experiences on the fly. So I really appreciate you guys listening, and I'd love to see questions and pass it back to Marco.
Are you enjoying Behind the Shield? Enjoy it more without commercials. Watch us live without interruption by registering for our virtual event each month. Visit virtualguardian.com/event and check out what's planned for the next Behind the Shield. Remember, when you're behind the shield, you're ahead of the game.
Thank you, Branden. Very nice talk. Very interesting point of view about the trust. We have actually several questions coming in while you were talking. So the first one here is, how do you see the recently introduced passkey initiative from Apple, Google, and company affecting the IAM landscape in the short and long term?
So I saw that question come in, and I was one of the things that I got distracted a minute because I got really excited about that question.
Okay,
so
all right.
I think passkeys are fantastic. Now, I also think there is a caveat. There is an asterisk to this, okay? Passkeys for personal use are absolutely wonderful because it definitely is that good step to strong authentication and removing the password from the equation. For me, logging into buy something on a website or, conduct a trade. For the corporate side, there's a little bit of a catch we all have to kind of think about it. How that's the context of how the passkey is generated. So in the Apple world, when you generate a passkey, it's generally synced to your iCloud account, which means that if me from a corporate person am leveraging that passkey for you to get access to corporate resources, I am now dependent on you doing the proper things with your personal iCloud account to make sure that you've secured it and that you don't use that to sign into Apple and on your kid's iPad, which means now that passkey can move its way down there, right? So I think it's something that there are a lot of different ways we can look at it. And depending on the ecosystem that you're in, it can be, great. And you may say, hey, I'm accepting all the risk with that because it's a better option than what I have today. But I do think that this is the thing we've been waiting for. Like, this is the thing that's really going to modernize. And now that both browser manufacturers and operating system manufacturers have really embraced this, that's what's really going to help us launch this thing forward.
Okay, cool. We have a kind of a follow-up to that one. Is it tied to mass adoption by the independent software developers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say that I'm a huge FIDO fan. I've got our favorite, hardware tokens that everybody uses. I literally have like 10 of them here. And I think I was joking with our CIO the other day because he was like, man, I should try one of those out. And I'm like, I think I have one in the box I haven't even opened in my drawer. And I showed it to him, right? So I love them because they represent the best type of authentication, in my opinion, right? But still not that many websites support them. Like tech-savvy websites do. And I'm very thankful that, Google does and Facebook does and Dropbox and other services that would have information that people would want to phish. But, I still can't use it in the majority, I think almost all of my financial services accounts. And I understand the reason why, because I lived on that other side of the world and what the management would be. But it really does come down to now that it's easy in the browser and the browser prompts you, like it's really a fantastic experience in the modern browser. It's just up to the software developers on the other side to enable that feature. And if they're using a modern identity platform, it literally is push a button. And then, you may have to make a couple of adjustments, but if I enable that feature, it's there and it'll automatically work.
Okay, thank you. I have another question here from the audience. William from William. William says, great session, guys. I was curious to see how you feel that a physical access layer like YubiKeys fit into a company's MFA strategy. Is it recommended best practice or more niche for specific type of organizations?
So I would say that with any decision or discussion around a security control or an authentication control, it all comes down to a risk-based decision that has to happen with the business. So like in certain cases, 100%, there are certain people in every single organization that should have a FIDO token. And that's what they should use for authentication. I use it personally, but I also understand that for me, I'm a nerd about this stuff. So I love this. And I have my army of YubiKeys and other hardware keys, and I use those all the time, right? When I'm able to use them. But it is in sort of, some people I've heard say, well, it feels like a step back, Branden, because in the old days, we used to have these tokens hanging off our keychains, and then we got away from it by using our phones, and now we're seeming to go backwards. And it is something you have to keep up with. There's also this notion that, if I use a strong authenticator tied to my phone, whether it's FIDO or not, there are certain jurisdictions in the world where employees don't want to use their own personal technology. And companies also don't want to buy more phones than they have to. So there's that alternative to say, okay, fine. If you don't want to use the phone that you have that we've approved for use with our authentication, we'll send you a hardware key, but you're now responsible for that hardware hardware key and you have to replace it if you lose it, right? So I absolutely think that they play a huge role in any authentication strategy. I don't necessarily think that every employee, contractor, or temporary worker needs to have one.
I've seen that, Branden, as well. The, sort of the economic side, which you kind of alluded to, is, managing and maintaining hardware tokens can be expensive for an organization.
Yeah.
Obviously, with B2C, you never see that because it just never works. But then on the flip side, you have to deal with all these authenticator apps. You could have like 4 or 5 of them running on your device, because they don't necessarily promote a single authenticator. You can use many, right? So you get a sprawl in that environment. So there becomes maintenance on that side as well. So the kind of hard token versus soft token argument.
Yeah, and I think it does come down to, how do you want to support it? It really is an operations question, right? So At the bank, we wanted to do a program called Bring Your Own Authenticator for customers. Like, I didn't really care if you had a FIDO token or if you were going to use Push in our mobile app or if you're going to use the Google TOTP. I didn't really care because I had enough other controls. But I wanted you to be able to bring something that you wanted to work with, that you were comfortable working with and that you already built a system around. Problem is there's so many of those systems right now. And and to be able to support that becomes a training issue, because now what if the TOTP doesn't work? What if the Google Authenticator doesn't work? Or what if the YubiKey doesn't work? Well, that's going to generate a support call. And so somebody has to be able to answer that call and be able to help that customer get through. Otherwise, you just shifted the problem, right? You still have this massive cost thing that's sitting there. So people that are really good at operations excellence and can, handle stuff like that will do really well doing stuff like that.
Good point, Steve. Another question. You talked about an untrustworthy world, and I'd like to know. This question comes from me, so I'm kind of building it as I go. But I'd like to know how a CISO can shape the organization's trust building in that type of world that you described in your spotlight talk.
So I think ultimately, there's the realization that trust doesn't really exist uniformly. It's difficult to create, right? Even in personal interactions, right? Social engineering is there. You talking to somebody that you don't know or that you maybe just met, and they could be leading you down a pathway that's great for them and harmful for you, and you may not know because you haven't established that trust, right? So I think it's important to retain a little bit of the skepticism and realizing that attackers are probably in your environment in some form or fashion. So if you can approach it from that perspective, then you can start to think about, how do I carve out areas of trust that I know will add value to the business? I don't really want to talk like the zero trust thing, because I'm not so sure that works beyond the marketing. Anybody who's really like dug in and tried to implement what's there sort of realizes that, no, it's not really zero trust. It's more like least trust. It's an asymptote that you can never really approach. You're going to get close, but there's also a diminishing return element to that as well. You're going to end up spending way more money trying to get there than you're going to get value and utility out of it, right? So for me, and what we talk to our CISOs, having, granted, I work for Ping Identity, right? But having strong identity and strong quality identity and interactions and continuous authentication and authorization is one key element to building that level of trust.
And this link between identity and trust, how can the identity, in a nutshell, how can the CISO use the identity to build that trust as quickly as possible? Is that how can identity help a CISO build trust? Is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So I would say that there's a number of ways to do that. The first one is making sure it's integrated into all the applications that people are going to use. Make sure that you have really good identity proofing, so that you know who the person is that's using that identity, and you have a good assurance that that's the authorized person. And ultimately, you can't just put all of your eggs in the protection basket, right? You have to spend on prevention and protection as well. Prevention as well as detection, and watching the activity that's happening, and recovery almost equally, right? You really need to be focused on all three of those things. So we would oftentimes say, look, we can't roll a patch on a particular piece of software at this exact moment, but we can watch for specific types of traffic if somebody does try to exploit something that would be there, and take countermeasures to try to stop it, right? So it's making sure that you're not just trying to prevent all the things that you actually do look for detection, you can react and respond to detection as well.
Very good. That does it for customer questions. My questions also. Patrick, Steve, anything to add?
I had a question, I guess, for Branden. When you were talking there, I was most interested in your view of, when I talk to CISOs, they also seem to talk a lot about treating identity as a business enabler. So then the value of the trust relationship is even more important versus just in the security context and that value of trust. Like how do you view identity as a business enabler?
So it's really sort of tying in everything that person does together and creating that larger picture to understand. So on a very rudimentary example, when you do business with your bank, they build a fraud profile on you. They know where you like to spend money. They know the types of amounts that you typically spend. They're watching your activity when you're logging into their online or mobile banking, and they're building profiles on what they think is safe and what they think is not safe. And I mean, we've all bought something or traveled somewhere and tried to use a card and have it be declined and get a phone, text message. Hey, was that actually you? Yes, no. Okay, go ahead and rerun the transaction, right? So it's all of that together. It's almost like this constant continuous authentication, which, by the way, does sound a little big brothery. And that's why I think we need good privacy rules and regulations to help understand how you can still get the value from that without sort of infringing on specific privacy rights that might exist. But that's what it means to me. It means like taking every attribute that you can to learn about a user's behavior, building profiles, and then being able to sort of build trust upon the fact that, yes, this person is acting in a way that we've seen before. This is normal. Therefore, we have a high assurance that this is a good activity that's occurring. We don't need to do anything to stop that.
Great answer. Thank you very much, Branden. Good spotlight talk. Patrick, Steve, thank you. That was good insights on the panel. So we're running out of show. If you've missed any part of today's events, the show will be made available on most popular podcast services sometime next week. So make sure to look out for that. And again, one last time, I'd like to, before we sign off, just thank everybody today. Big thank you to Branden Williams for his talk. Patrick, Steve for their insight. And, thank you for all your participation. And to you all listening at home, I hope you enjoyed today's show. The podcast doesn't exist without your support, and hopefully you enjoyed yourself, and you'll return to next month, where we're going to be in front of something very special. I'm a little bit nervous. Patrick, you know about it. We're going to be in front of a live studio audience. So that's going to be very, very special. You won't want to miss that, BTS. And on top of everything else, as if that was not enough, I don't know how the people behind the show pulled this off, but they managed to get a Pulitzer Prize winning guest on the show. I'm not going to name who it is, but I promise you won't want to miss that show as well. So hopefully we'll see you there. Thanks again to our sponsor, Ping Identity, for today's show. And as always, remember that when you're behind a shield, you're ahead of the game. Thank you very much, everybody.